This is a special episode of the Legislature Today. I'm Ashton Mara, live from the Senate reception room in the West Virginia State Capitol. Joining me this evening is a panel of representatives from both sides of the aisle: Republican Senate Majority Leader Ryan Ferns, Democratic Senator Ron Stallings, and Governor Jim Justice's Legislative Director, a former Republican member of the West Virginia Legislature, Bob Ashley. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being with me this evening.
Thank you.
Definitely a different kind of speech we saw from the governor today. And Senator Stallings, I think I want to start with you because you said you've been here for about 11 years now, quite a few governors. What do you think of that kind of speech we saw out there tonight?
Well, it was different. It was filled with optimism, even in what was called dire times. I mean, we find ourselves in a very bad budget situation, and so when we have to do some pretty major heavy lifting in order to get us out of the place we find ourselves.
Yeah, Senator Ferns, what do you feel about that speech?
I felt it was extremely disappointing, to be honest with you. Governor Justice campaigned on saying that the citizens of West Virginia could not afford to be taxed anymore. And I don't have the total numbers. He never said the total numbers in that speech, but to me, it sounds like we're approaching $450 million in proposed tax increases from the governor's budget. That would be, if my history is correct, would be the biggest tax increase in the history of the state of West Virginia. Like I said, he campaigned on that after he was elected. The things that we heard from his office were, we need to control government spending. This is the least original idea that I think he could have come up with. This is the exact scenario that landed us in the problem that we're in today. Every time in the history of West Virginia that we've had budget shortfalls, governors in the past have resorted to tax increases, and so we just got more of the same today.
Well, let's unpack the governor's budget proposal a little bit. And Mr. Ashley, I'm going to kind of rely on you a little bit. I have seen a bit of the proposal, but we're talking about a $450 million tax increase that's based on 0.5% in the sales tax. Mm-hmm. And we're also talking about closing those loopholes, which the Senate President and the House Speaker have been talking about, and they want to do, closing those loopholes in the sales tax, and then something called a commercial activities tax. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about those three proposals and how the governor got there.
Well, the governor looked at the budget, and he was coming out with trying to cut. And Governor Justice thinks big. I mean, he's not a small thinker, and he's not a person who says, oh my, we're in trouble, what are we going to do? He's a person that, as he worked through the budget and the cutting, and let me tell you something, if you go on the governor's website, you will find what $450 million means in cuts in West Virginia, and it is not pretty. It takes a lot of the services out of these guys, all of our communities. He looked at that and he said, I can't do it to the people of West Virginia. I've got to come up. I've got to ask them and try to be as pain-free as we can to build a budget that has opportunity. That, yeah, he's looking at cutting some things, as he mentioned in his speech, but he felt very much that West Virginia would never get off the 50th position if he didn't have some increases, and then as he works through, do some cuts. But his goal right now is, let's get West Virginia rolling again. Let's make West Virginia the place of opportunity where people all over the country look at us as we're correcting our ship. Mm. And so that's why he chose that way. He just looked at the cuts and they were tough.
Yeah, so we're talking about I think the total that the budget office gave today, the deficit for next year, is $497 million. That's where they're placing it.
That's exactly.
So he's talking about $450.5 million in tax increases, $26.6 million in targeted cuts. Gentlemen, I know you haven't seen those cuts, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about them and ask you for some reaction. We're talking about things like cutting the RESAs, the Division of Labor, the Educational Broadcasting Authority, which we have to be very clear, that's us, that's West Virginia Public Broadcasting, culture and history, and then taking about 4.5% from WVU and Marshall. Now, there are a few more in there. There's a total of 10 agencies, but Senator Stallings, let's start with you. I mean, $26.6 million. Is there more to cut, or have we just reached our limit?
If you look at the budget, there's $2 billion for secondary education, there's $1 billion for health, and there's another $1 billion that includes colleges and universities, state police, and all those things. We don't, and over the past 4 years or so, we've cut $600 million out of that budget. To get out of 2017, we're going to have to come up with $200 million just to get out of this year. That's probably going to come from the rainy day fund. I can tell you that if you cut all funding to higher education, fund not one penny to any college or university in West Virginia, you come up with about $400 million. Guess what? We're still short. What are you going to do? Cut $80 million out of the state, please? I feel that in desperate times, you got to do desperate things, and so we had to raise some revenue. I applaud him for that. The other thing that he's looking to do is not only just balance this budget this year, but he's going to build some roads and grow our economy and diversify our economy. You saw that big board out there with all the road bonding issues and the gas tax. I mean, that's a way to our future. You got to grow the economy. You can't just look at it as balancing the budget. We have to get out of the mess we're in. And we have been so dependent on coal. God bless coal. I'm from Boone County. But we have to diversify and grow our economy. It was a tough decision for him to have to do that. And I think he really didn't understand what bleak situation we were in when he said, let's not raise taxes. You have to raise taxes. And I truly believe that it is the most gentle way to do it, that everybody pays a little bit. And then the other beautiful thing about it, look, in 3 years from now, if we're doing okay, sunset them. Take away those taxes.
Well, Senator Ferns, you made yourself clear you're not really happy with the tax increases. So there's more cutting to do there?
Well, I think it's about living within our means, controlling the government spending. We have a certain amount of revenue coming into our state, and we have to live within those means. So, that's your starting point. You look at what are we capable of bringing in with the current tax code and the current revenue sources that we have, and that's our starting point. That's where we go to begin living within our means.
I've asked the Senate President and I've asked the Speaker, living within our means, making these cuts. You all are comfortable to do that when that means laying off employees?
I think, there's a possibility that layoffs would have to occur. We're talking about state agencies. The trouble is these state agencies are under the governors, they're under the executive branch. And I think it's appropriate that a governor would make the decision as where cuts need to be made. That's the reason our Constitution is set up the way it is, and that the governor on the first day of the session proposes his budget. Because we don't have the ability, the legislature doesn't have the ability to look inside these agencies to determine where targeted cuts can be made, and that's really why it needs to come from the governor.
So I keep wanting to call you Senator Ashley, and I'm so sorry, but that's going to get confusing. Mr. Ashley, Senator Stallings brought up the governor's infrastructure proposal about roads.
Yes.
And let's talk about that a little bit more. So we're talking about 10-cent increase on gasoline,
Yes.
increasing some DMV fees
Right.
that's been talked about at the legislature for a while,
Yes.
haven't been increased since the 70s.
Early 70s, from what I understand.
And the money from that, also then increasing the tolls on the turnpike,
Yes.
and that money is going to be bonded.
Yes.
Explain
What he
that
wants to
us.
do, he has to go with part of it to the vote of the people. As he was talking to the people, please call and let them know. The governor envisions, as we open up West Virginia with new opportunities, with new highways, that growth will occur. And for those people who are as my age that remember when I was in high school and college and after college, in the early 70s, when road building, when the interstates were going through, the corridors were going through West Virginia, the national media was saying, what's happening in West Virginia? It's growing. There's opportunities coming. We got plants, we got opportunities because transportation was easy. He envisions a plan so much like that, and it's never been talked about since that time. And if you go in, I believe, if you go in and spend the money and on this bold plan and get open up roads throughout West Virginia, I think you'll see growth. You look today, and I always talked when I was in the legislature about communities that were haves and have-nots. The haves were the ones where the federal government came in with the infrastructures, whether it be agencies or whether it be the roads. Those were the growing places. The have-nots are withering away on the vine. And so he wants to open up more opportunities in West Virginia. His bond, as he takes this money to go to the market to try to get what bond it will bring, will be opportunities. And when have you heard West Virginia talking about $1 billion or $2 billion worth of road projects? That's what we need.
Senator Ferns, let's go to you first because you've got a Republican voice talking to you about bonding, to build new roads and for infrastructure projects. Does that sound like something the Republican majority is willing to do? Increase some fees, increase the gasoline tax to bond it for new projects?
Well, I think bonding is a relatively new idea. It's not something I'm all that familiar with, and from the governor's speech tonight, I couldn't quite tell exactly how he was going about achieving that. I think it goes back to the same thing I was saying before. You're talking about a 10-cent per gallon gasoline tax increase. Maybe the DMVs don't seem that big written up on the whiteboard, but it just goes back to the idea that the citizens of West Virginia can't burden any more taxes. I mean, the pool of citizens that we have that are even paying into the tax base continues to dwindle. We can't just continue to pile on them.
Senator Stallings, how do you feel about this road bond initiative?
I think it's a way to grow our economy, and we absolutely have to do it. It's not just roads, but it could also provide money for broadband infrastructure. When I think of the Southwest coal fields, and it's been pumping so much money into the general revenue fund forever, but in order to diversify that economy, you have to have that transportation and infrastructure. And so when we build 73, 74 interstate from Detroit to Myrtle Beach, and it comes through McDowell County, that's how we're going to really transform that whole economy down there. And so I think it's a necessary evil. No one wants to pay higher taxes, but at the same time, if we don't do this, we're going to be coming back each year. Well, what can we cut to balance the budget? How can we have to grow and diversify our way out of where we are right now. And I'm very excited. I mean, again, he mentioned about open up these areas where people can get to them to visit and to do the tourism and we are within 600 miles of what 2/3 of the population of the United States of America. And yet it's hard to get here. How do you get to Snowshoe? So when you get these roads in here, you really are going to open up what we already know. It's a wonderful place, the mountains and the rivers. It's very exciting that, and I could just sense the optimism in his voice when he was talking about that.
Another proposal that we've heard the governor mention several times and was still a little bit vague tonight, so I'm going to ask if there are any details, and that's tiering the severance tax.
What he's saying in his speech and his vision is when the industry is suffering like it is now, it has a low fee. A lot of the people in the industries wanted to get rid of severance, if you remember a couple of years ago. He's saying no, there always needs to be a severance tax. When times are tough, then you have a low fee. When times are good, and we've seen that, and I understand a while back, a few months ago, metallurgical coal hit very high. And at that point, it needs to be taxed at a higher rate. And so he has a fee, a sliding fee for, depending upon the price of coal, depending upon the price of oil and gas, that will be in there. But West Virginia will continue its severance tax.
So does he have a specific piece of legislation written right now that lays out those
It's coming.
tiers?
I know it's being written. I don't know if it's laid out yet, but it's coming.
So can the Republicans get behind a tier on the severance tax?
I think it makes sense. We'd have to look at the numbers. Again, this is not something I've had a chance to analyze and see, kind of project how that would play out, how that would affect our budget, how that would affect revenue coming in from severance taxes. It sounds like a reasonable idea, but again, I'd have to analyze the specifics of it.
Senator Stallings, we got about a minute left, and I'll give you the final word. Do you think the Democrats can get behind a tiered severance tax?
Again, it has to be closely tied to the price of coal. I come from a county that severance tax dependent, very much so, and of course, only a small portion of that stays locally. The rest of it goes to the general revenue fund. So 92% or so goes to the general revenue fund. And so the counties will hurt, obviously, if it's 2% or 3%. But if you also, if you can get the boom cycle where it goes from 5% to 10% when the coal's really selling well and the price is up, then I think people would get behind it based on. But if it has to be closely tied to the price of coal. And again, we are so focused on coal, aren't we? But at the same time, we really have to diversify. I think part of the reason we're in this room, in bad shape is the coal industry tanking.
Senate Majority Leader Ryan Ferns, Senator Ron Stallings, and Legislative Director for Governor Justice Bob Ashley. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a special episode of the Legislature Today. I'm Ashton Mara. A new season of our program begins Monday, February 13th at 6:30 p.m. and airs every weeknight on television, on radio, and online at wvpublic.org. From all of us here at the State Capitol, thanks for joining us.